Story Club virgins are killing it tonight. I love it. Everyone brought their A game, unlike those guys last month. It's a terrible thing to say. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, that was awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, I lived next door to a family like that where it's like I wasn't allowed to watch the movie Cocktail, and I call my mom and say, "Mom, can I watch Cocktail?" And she's like, "No." And then an hour and 45 minutes later, I came home, and she was like, "Look me in the eye. Did you watch Cocktail?" And I was like, "I watched Cocktail." And I was like crying. And I felt it's a terrible movie. Like, it's really wasn't worth it. Like, I didn't understand anything. It was about bartending, and then someone fell down the stairs in a boat. I don't know what happened. So, up next, we have another New Story Club person. Her name is Alexandra Junewicz, thank you. I like to say the last names correctly. And she is going to be reading an excerpt from Sissy. Is that a book?
It's a longer story.
It's a longer story? All right, awesome. Let's welcome Alexandra.
I grew up in a house by the sea. I grew up in a house by the sea. I like to tell it like this because, even though it's farther from the truth, it's closer to the way I saw it back then. Really, I grew up in a house on a lake. But when I was little, it seemed every bit as vast as the sea because I couldn't see across it to the other side. It stretched out before me, blue beyond blue, gradations of gray into turquoise into sapphire shades, until it formed an inky blue line across the horizon and dropped off into nowhere. When I was a toddler, my parents closed off the water by stringing a little chain link fence along the rim of our backyard, with a little gate that latched high above my head. Of course, by age 7, I had grown tall enough to reach up and easily open this gate, but before then, I used to wedge my feet into the links and pull myself up so that my chin perched on the bar along the top. I would stare at the sea for hours, listening to the waves slap and lick the rocks, their rhythm churning my daydreams of what lay under the sheet of blue. I crafted a marvelous world down there. I didn't imagine this world entirely on my own. Its roots lay in the tales of my father, who used to sit on the edge of my bed before I fell asleep and tell me stories that I scrolled at the stars blinking at me through my window. But I'm not trying to blame him for what happened. I don't want this to be one of those stories where a longing parent unintentionally messes up a fragile child. You see, my father was a deep sea diver. So when I asked him what was at the bottom of the sea outside, and he told me of seashell cottages and carriages pulled by sea turtles and a bearded dragon who sat on an opalescent throne and ruled, I took everything he said for irrefutable truth. I pried into the inner workings of this world as much as I could. "Daddy, who lives there with the dragon?" I asked. "Well, there are the fishes and the whales and the seahorses to help the sea turtles when they get tired," he said. He smiled, his eyes twinkling like stars in the dark. And, of course, mermaids live in the seashell cottages. This made me squirm under my covers with delight. I fell asleep with my blankets twisted in my fists and my mind flitting with the mermaids through the seashell land below. The strange thing is that when I was able to reach that latch and wander into the lake to explore, this other world under the sea lost its opalescent luster for me. Beneath my covers, I shrugged off my father's tales. I was still fascinated by the sea I lived beside, but a different aspect of it. You see, in November, the water closest to the beach froze into a piece of ice that stretched out far beyond the fence. It ended in jagged ice where the water, deep blue with chill, would crash into it and crumble it into pieces that floated off into the distance. When the snow came, it blanketed the ice, forming a pillow of white out far beyond my house. I quickly grew eager to make the first footprints in that fresh bed of sparkly snow. "Cecilia, don't you go out on that lake, sweetie," my mother said one day after the first snow of winter. She had caught me out there building snowmen the day before. "You don't want to fall through." "I'll stay on the beach," I answered, gazing out into the snow, still bright white and fluffy. "Well, be careful. You can't see where the beach ends under all that snow." Looking back, I realized that the snow-covered ice did to me what Niagara Falls is rumored to do to those who live near it. They say if you listen to the waterfall thundering long enough, you start to feel like it's calling you, and you can't help but do what it says and jump in. I think that's why, despite my mother's warnings, I'd pile my dolls into my little red sled and venture through that gate. I never wanted to disobey my parents. I wasn't the kind of child who deliberately does what she's told not to. One night, my father came into my room as I was falling asleep, but he didn't tell me any stories. Instead, he took my hand and clasped his around it. He had just come home from a scuba diving trip far away, and he smelled salty like the sea. My mother came in too, clean of paint and wearing her pink nightgown. Your mother and I have some exciting news, my father said. You're going to have a little brother. You're having a baby. My mother looked at my father and let out a small laugh. We're adopting, my father said. A little boy is going to come live with us. Later, after I had grown up and had 2 girls of my own, I realized that this was no thing to say to a child of 7 who hardly had any friends and barely saw their children outside of school. But back then, it was as if we all occupied our own sort of imaginary world. If mine was under the sea outside my window, my mother's was inside her paintings, and my father's wasn't near our house at all, but on faraway boats and beaches he traveled to on scuba trips. Why, I blurted out. Though I couldn't see my mother's face, I could feel it falling. Of course, my reaction didn't match her artistic vision for the world she was trying to construct in our home. Daddy and I don't want you to be lonely, and Gabriel really needs a home. Wouldn't it be nice to have another child in our family? My father squeezed my hand in the dark. Come on now, act like Lalabella would. Lalabella was a mermaid he had invented for me, crafting her to be my underwater alter ego. Gabriel had a round face and dark eyes that kind of sunk into it, like little rocks dropped in sand. He was younger than me, 4 maybe, and had come wearing a little leather jacket and a basketball jersey that went down to his knees, which my mother quickly pulled off him and replaced with a bright blue t-shirt and khaki shorts. Her grand idea, I later learned, was to give him the best kind of childhood, one he never would have had otherwise. She was to expose him to the arts, teaching him to paint boat-dotted waters like she did. My father was to be his eager guide to the effervescent outdoors, taking him swimming and scuba diving and hunting for sea creatures washed up on shore. I was to be his big sister. Sissy, he chanted at me from the very beginning. This word, the way he said it with a slight lisp and a babyish lilt, grated against me. It's Cecilia, I told him. That's what he's saying, sweetie, my mother said. Ceci, he has a nickname for you. Still, I didn't hear Ceci, but Sissy, and I found this word infuriating. I knew I wasn't his sister, and I viewed any suggestion that I was to be a flat-out, straight-up lie. But my firm convictions didn't make the world I was being forced into go away. Are you excited to play with your new brother today? My mother asked me. It was a few weeks after his arrival, and my mother was making my breakfast and her coffee before she began painting. Gabriel was still upstairs, curled like an inchworm and tucked beneath his new quilt printed with rainbow-headed clowns. I shrugged. Then I caught a desperate, eager look in my mother's eyes. Since Gabriel had arrived, I had wanted to please her more than ever before. I told her I was excited. My mother sat down at the table and pressed her chin into her hands. Her smile was so wide I could see the dark spaces far back in her mouth. Tell me everything you'll do together, she said. Well, I began. By then, I knew there were right and wrong answers to these sorts of questions. First, I'll show him my dolls, and then we'll play with his toys, I said, finishing it all off with a smile. Oh, good, I'm so proud of you, my mother said. Her fingers brushed the top of my head as she picked up her coffee mug and disappeared into her studio. I couldn't tell my mother how I really felt, because really, I wanted Gabriel gone.
Thank you. Was that fiction? Non-fiction? It was fiction? Because I was like, it could have been non-fiction. Your brother's in trouble. Thank you very much. When I got ice skates for Christmas one year, and we had a lake by our house, and my dad took me out on Christmas Day to go ice skating, and we both got there, and we were like, this isn't happening. And we just left. And I never put them on again. It was a great present. Good memory. Thank you.